Let's dive right into the deep end now. Lots of passengers are reacting to a new policy by Southwest Airlines for flyers who require extra space. Starting on January 27th of next year, passengers who encroach on a neighboring seat will be required to purchase an extra ticket, one that may not be refunded. And joining the conversation now is Parag Amin. Parag is a lawyer and business expert who's been on ARC Seattle before. So Parag, thank you for joining us once again this morning.
Good morning, my pleasure.
So where did this policy come from?
Well, this policy came from Southwest realizing that it's got to do things a little bit differently for it to continue to remain profitable. So Southwest has moved from being all about the love to being all about the bottom line. So what they're saying is that if you are a larger passenger, its prior policy of you being able to quietly get an extra seat at the gate is no longer going to apply. They are going to ask you to purchase an extra seat ahead of time. But the nice thing is it's still friendlier than many of the other airline carriers in that it lets you refund or request a refund within 90 days, whereas most other carriers would not.
How did the airline, Southwest in particular, operate when it comes to these types of passengers in the past? What's the comparison difference here?
Yeah, so Southwest Airlines for the last 30 years before this policy change has believed in allowing larger passengers to be able to get a free extra seat if they ask for it and at no extra fee. So they are changing that starting in January of next year.
And have other airlines operated similar in the past? You talked a little bit about the comparison between Southwest and other airlines, but how do those compare? Are they equally different across airline to airline to airline?
Well, many of the major carriers, such as American, Delta, have a much stricter policy, which is that if you don't fit within the two armrests of your seat, then you're required to buy another seat, and it is not refundable, regardless of whether the flight is full. Now, that's different from Southwest in that Southwest is saying, look, if you are one of those people who fits into that category of not being able to fit between the two seat rests, you're now being required to purchase in advance. But as long as you request the refund within 90 days after the flight, they are willing to consider the refund request as long as the flight wasn't full and that the request or the refund request is within the same section of the plane. Because remember, Southwest is also changing its policy on sit wherever you like. So that's going to be another issue that we're going to have to wait and see how that affects these passengers and the carrier overall.
And that was going to lead into my next question, which is, we know that this is not the first headline-making move that the airline has made recently. Lay out some of the changes that the airline has announced.
Well, the airline is also requiring passengers to start paying for baggage, which has been one of Southwest's oldest phrases, that 2 bags fly free. And that's a policy seemingly as old as the red Coca-Cola can. But Southwest, in a move towards looking at its bottom line, has said that you've got to start paying for baggage. So you're no longer getting those 2 free bags when you fly.
I want to switch gears a little bit to ask you a question about Microsoft, which of course is based here locally in Redmond, Washington. Company recently fired 4 employees who protested on their Redmond headquarters campus and 1 case inside the president's office. From a legal standpoint, explain what rights employees have to protest at the workplace.
Well, it's a great question. So look, employees are allowed to hold whatever differing opinions or views they have. The challenge is, in this situation, the way the employees protested, one, they don't have a legally protected right to necessarily protest against social issues, and this would fall into the area of social issues. Whereas, for example, if they were protesting against labor violations or other kind of discriminatory practices, those would generally be considered protected free speech, but your rights are relatively limited at a private employer like Microsoft. And also something else to keep in mind is the way in which these protests were done, including breaking into the president's office, is destructive to the company. I mean, if an employee was to, for example, take the day off and protest outside in an organized protest in a lawful manner, that would be a very different situation than the one we're talking about here. And I think that's why Microsoft went ahead and terminated many of those employees who were involved in this, is because they just could not allow that kind of behavior in the workplace.
And Parag, from your legal standpoint, what's that line that an employee can't cross? Is it when destruction is made to a particular company, when it's impacting operations for the company? What's that line look like? Or is it kind of gray?
Well, that's exactly right. When somebody crosses the line into destroying company property, that is an unlawful and illegal act. So a simple way to think about it is if it's let's say it's not an employee, but somebody else just comes into the office and starts destroying property. Of course, that's a criminal act. Of course, that can be prosecuted. So the line is no different when it comes to an employee. Now, when it comes to social issues, an employee can voice their opinion and say that they're against a certain policy, and depending on how they phrase it, depending on how disruptive it is, it may or not be protected. So it does fall into a gray area in terms of how an employee expresses themselves and what they're actually doing. Look, ultimately, it would be improper for them to go ahead and terminate an employee for simply organizing or being a part of a protest that's completely outside of work, that doesn't affect the workplace. But in this situation, it's very clear that it adversely affected the workplace and there was destruction of property. So Microsoft is well within its legal rights to terminate those employees.
All right, Parag, appreciate your advice and analysis on this situation in both regards with Southwest and Microsoft. Good to see you again. Thanks for your time.
Likewise, thank you.